Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Steve Nevos. I am the Belgian weightlifting dermatologist. Today I am honored to interview once again Dr. Mike Israetel. Welcome, Mike.
Thanks for having me on. Good to talk to you.
Thanks. In this interview I will be asking Mike all about one topic. Is training volume killing your gains? Let me first explain what's been going on YouTube Fitness lately. First, very popular Athlean X Jeff Cavaliere made a video explaining how doing too much volume makes people less focused on intensity. Next, Jeff Nippard made a video on the same subject explaining his point of view.
Where you're trying to stay in this optimized zone of the volume gains curve. Generally speaking, that's going to mean a moderate to high volume of training, again fine-tuned to your training status and so on, but also a more moderate level of effort, where you're generally leaving 1 to 2, maybe 3 reps in the tank, and occasionally going to failure.
And then Canadian IFBB pro Greg Doucette, with a YouTube channel over 150,000 subscribers, released his video on how to maximize muscle growth, stating that nowadays everybody is overcomplicating training and focusing way too much on volume and not enough on intensity.
Lately, all the buzz is about volume. You got to do more sets, more growth, more sets. So people are going set after set after set.
That's a bit of an overview what we'll be talking about today, and who is better suited for an interview on that topic than Mike Israetel himself, the author of the book How Much Should I Train? An Introduction to the Volume Landmarks. Welcome to my channel. I am Steven,
The Lifting Dermatologist,
a Belgian doctor with 30 years of weightlifting experience and the author of Flexibel Dieet and Krachttraining. If you want to learn more about fitness and nutrition, hormones and anti-aging,
please like and subscribe.
All this to optimize your life overall.
Click the bell button to get notified.
I also invite you to join my other YouTube channel TRT and Hormone Optimization. The link you can find in the description of this video. So, okay, let me first ask you, Mike, had you heard of Greg Doucette before?
Yeah, for sure. So he's an exceptional bodybuilder and actually a phenomenal powerlifter as well. And I think his physique is excellent. His strength is just super impressive, and I've heard nothing but good things about him. Yeah.
Okay, so Greg, as he says in the beginning of all his videos, he's no doctor, he's a kinesiologist.
I am not a doctor, I'm a kinesiologist. I have a degree, I have a master's degree. I know all about this stuff.
You have a PhD and he is a IFBB pro, so surely he must know how to train, right? And another question I've heard multiple times before, if you, Mike, know so much about all this stuff, how come you are not an IFBB pro?
Yeah. Well, so, what makes you a pro is the intersection of years of work, genetics, and various other special sports supplement factors. And, maybe I haven't worked hard enough. Maybe I haven't taken as many drugs as I have to, and maybe my genetics suck. And maybe I don't really know what I'm talking about. So those are all potential hypotheses that we could look into. And, there's absolutely a chance that folks at the pro ranks know their stuff really well. Because if you have really good genetics and you train pretty hard for a while, sometimes you can turn pro and know preciously little about training. You have to know the basics, something like this. Train hard, train the target muscles you want to train, eat plenty of food, and don't train again until you're ready to train hard again. And when you get a lot of fatigue, take some time away, train a little less hard or time off, and then repeat the process. I mean, that explains probably 85 or 90% of all the variance you'll ever see in muscle size. So what, volume specifics for some individuals can be really important, but generally a lot of the stuff you can intuit yourself and get within a range of what I would call effective. Now, the debate between effective and optimally effective is a little bit of a different issue altogether, and I think I'm pretty well interested in having that discussion.
Okay, so first question, what does the research say about training volume? Because Greg says the research says everything.
Problem is the research says everything.
So how can we know what research to trust?
Well, we know what research to trust by reading all the research. And several people in the industry have done that and have published very lengthy, comprehensive reviews of the literature. Non-peer reviewed. This has been done exceptionally well by Greg Nuckols, exceptionally well by James Krieger, and these are available on the internet. And then it has been done by Brad Schoenfeld and his many colleagues, among other individuals. So we actually have multiple comprehensive reviews, and these are giant papers that take a look at more or less all the studies that are relevant to training volume and hypertrophy. They examine every study, they examine some of its strengths and weaknesses, and examine how much of an effect. So basically, does this study say, what was the optimal volume according to this study? Or what can we learn from this study? What can we learn from that? And you see them all together, and after looking at that, yeah, some different studies say different things, but overall, you get a picture. So for example, if, let's say, you're in a high school auditorium, and there's, like the school brings in a performer to sing for the kids or something like that. And you can ask kids as they walk out, like, what did you think? Was it a good performance? At least 10 of those 100 kids are going to tell you it sucked and that person's awful. And then, a lot of kids might say, it's great, I loved it, I think they should bring them back again next year. And you could say, well, the kids said everything. And that's true. But you have to look at how many kids said what. And if 90 kids out of 100 said it was great and 10 said it sucked, the average impression, if you say, well, the kids just said everything, isn't that the most accurate thing you could say? You'd have to say, most kids liked it. Overwhelmingly, most kids liked it. So I think it's probably pretty good, right? According to most kids. So just the same way you can do that with studies. And what the volume research has shown is actually some really, really, really insightful stuff. And I can get into precisely what that stuff is, but it has shown things that are repeatedly coalescing into a general understanding, and the outliers start to get fewer and fewer as you look at the data more and more, and everything seems to be pointing into one general direction.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, Greg says when people start a workout, knowing they have to perform so much volume, they train like pussies.
What do you think happens? They start training like pussies. When you do 20 sets of squats, none of them are going to be hard. You have to hold back.
Mm-hmm.
They don't train hard, they hold back. So you train like a pussy, Mike.
Yeah, that may be very, very well be the case. So I think so he makes an excellent point here. There's definitely a potential for that to happen. So if you look at a 20-set program and you show up to the gym and you're like, fuck, like, you might be like, I'm only going to try so hard until maybe the last couple sets. And then by the last couple sets, you're so tired, you don't try hard anyway, right? So it's almost the same thing as saying, like, if you run a marathon, you're never going to run very fast. And that's true. That's actually the proper way to run a marathon. But so it's absolutely valid critique. The thing is, the way you train properly is you give yourself a target of, I'm going to train exactly this hard. Now, we can talk later about what this hard should be, but let's even say to failure, right? Just to standardize it. I'm going to go to failure in every single, I'm going to push it psychologically like crazy. After you've answered the question of how hard am I going to train, you say to failure, you have to answer the second question of, well, so how many sets am I going to do? Yes, there is a tendency for higher volume programs for you to get tired and not work as hard. So that may cap how much effective volume, non-junk volume you can do. But all the volume you do from the first set to the nth set, if you hold yourself accountable, you can do them with maximum intent to lift, all out failure. You're still left with the question of how much, which unfortunately, I'm pretty sure I saw the entire video by Greg. He never actually answers the question of how much. He just says, go harder, and he yells a lot, which is funny. But it's precious little to learn from that other than go hard. And he may have very, very good critique that people just need to train fucking harder because they're straight bitches out here. And they may very well be true. Some people it's true, some people it's not. It's definitely true for a lot of people. But even once okay, I'm fucking training hard, do you do 3 hard sets? Do you do 6? Do you do 9? The training volume literature, and if you just look at the average of how almost all really good bodybuilders train, does give you some hints as to what that number probably is. And even if it doesn't do exactly that, it can tell you, like, if you're training a certain amount on the low side, like, you're probably not training enough. And if you're training on the high side, like, you better watch your recovery and adaptation and maybe even play with training less, and you could benefit. So I think it's a very great point he makes that people don't train hard enough, but you don't have to fall into that trap of, I'm going to do 20 sets, so I'm going to just buckle in and do them really easy. You can bring super intensity to every set, and you still have to answer the question of how many sets you're going to be doing. I know people, I've seen people who train with 20 plus sets per workout to failure every set. I think it's a fucking stupid idea most times because it's way too much for most people, but they can still do it. So yeah, while most people suffer this problem, some people don't, and they can't actually train properly, you still have to answer the question of how much to train.
Mm-hmm. Well, Greg says people should start the workout with the compound exercise and go all out, as if they were only allowed to do one set. No holding back, because you have to do multiple sets after that one.
On bench press, on deadlifts, on squats, whatever exercise I was doing, that is how I train. I went in with the mentality of, okay, today's back, I do deadlifts at the start. My deadlifts are the only thing that matters. I'm going all out. This is it. Once I'm done my deadlifts, the rest of the day is gravy on top of my workout. All out. All out. That's how I train.
So why isn't that a good idea in your opinion, Mike?
So if you look at the literature on training to failure, it shows us at least two things. Thing number one is that coming close to failure, about 2 or 3 reps away, if you take the net balance of the evidence, doesn't seem to provide any more stimulus than going all the way to failure. So the argument of going all the way to failure sort of falls apart right there. Now, most literature is on people who are relatively untrained or completely untrained. So you could surmise hypothetically that going really close to failure is much better for the very advanced, and it has a very distinct benefit. And I'm open-minded to that. As noticed, most of Greg's audience is not advanced, and they would do very fine with submaximal training. Maybe when you get to his level, only failure grows you. I could believe that. I'm skeptical in the sense that I'm open-minded to it, but I'm not super convinced. But I absolutely could believe that. But it's certainly not necessary for most people to train to failure. Point number one. So if someone says, you got to go all out, you could always say, like, but I don't. And they'll be like, well, I guess you don't. But it's fun. Or I don't know. I don't know what you would say to somebody like that, because they would be correct that you don't. The second point is regarding something called the stimulus to fatigue ratio, which is a term my colleagues and I coined. It's not a fucking magic term. It doesn't say anything other than this. For how much you get out of a set, how much does a set make you tired for the next set, for the next workout? And cumulative fatigue over time. The thing is that if you look deeply into the literature on training to failure and you read a bunch of other related things from sports science, going to failure on something, especially with a psychological component is tuned in and you're really going to failure, the stimulus seems to, I would bet that going to failure does actually grow more muscle by a small margin, but a meaningful one. So I think Greg is right on that. However, the amount of fatigue you get per set going to true failure is monumentally higher. It's exponentially higher. A lot of people use the term exponentially and infinitely reflexively. It's not the same thing as infinitely. Exponentially just means instead of going up like this, it goes up like that, right? So while you may get 1.1 times the growth of a set trained to failure versus not, you might get 1.5 times the fatigue. And then you have to realize that over the course of a week and a month and a year, the amount of stimulus you get should be maximized. The amount of fatigue you get should be minimized. That ratio between stimulus and fatigue is very important because, look, if you're getting great results but barely getting tired, you can train more, you can train more often, or you can just take fewer deloads and just get fucking better results for a really long time. But if you're getting just slightly better results per training session, but that means you can't do 2 hard workouts a week, now you have to do 1. I mean, for the love of God, you're cutting out a shitload of your gains. You're gaining 0.1, but you're losing another maybe 0.5 or something like that. So the stimulus to fatigue ratio is important. And I think that at the end of a mesocycle, right before you deload, there's a pretty good argument for going all out to failure, because who gives a shit? You're going to deload, the fatigue's going to fall anyway. You'd have nothing left to sort of be prepared for. But at any one workout, you have to not only think about future sets that you're doing, but you have to think about future workouts that you're doing. Like if I train my chest super hard now, what am I going to do in 3 or 4 days when I have to train it again? If I go to failure now, I'm going to get 1.1 times the growth. Sweet, that's good, right? But I'm going to get 1.5 times the fatigue, and my next chest workout is going to get 0.8 times the growth because it's going to fucking suck. So you have to think ahead a little bit. And you know, they say, like, you know, what's life's a marathon, not a sprint. Bodybuilding training's a marathon, not a sprint. You don't grow from one session alone. You grow from the sequential addition of multiple sessions over time. And if you're doing something that fatigues the living fuck out of you for what I would say is relatively minimal benefit, gee, you know, it's just not going to be something that you're going to be able to defend very much. You could have a training partner that never quite goes to failure. You're always going to failure. And by the 4th week of training, you're like, dude, I'm fucking fried. Deload time, right? He's like, I can go for 2 more weeks. You're like, fuck, but at least I'm growing more. And you sort of compare results, and you grew just a little bit more than he did during that time, but then you have to deload more often. So you're back to growing the same or even just a little bit less. You have a tendency to get injured more. And also from a psychological benefit, it just fries you and has a tendency to likely burn you out. I mean, training to true failure is real tough, real tough. And the more demons you have in your head, which I have plenty, the more failure training is fun, but also really hard. And then after a while, you know, that stimulus to fatigue ratio catches up to you, and you realize that if you want to be your biggest that you can be and your strongest that you can be, you absolutely have to have just at least some thought about it. Like, I mean, think about the stimulus to fatigue ratio. You give it some thought, you try it, because for folks that haven't ever tried training to true failure, and especially been big enough to where the fatigue really affects them, they can say, oh, yeah, failure is great, but after a while, then shit beats you up. And if you back off a little bit, you realize you're not getting really any worse gains, and over time, you get better gains because you can consistently summate more and more training over time.
Makes sense. Athlean's Jeff Cavaliere and Greg both call it an epidemic of people focusing on volume. They say the intensity is not high enough to create change.
It is a horrible epidemic of volume killing your gains.
This whole group of people now, this epidemic of people in this zone over here, wallowing in this zone where they think they're doing the right thing by adding more and more volume, but their intensity is not adequate enough to actually create change.
Can you explain to the viewers how they can make sure the intensity keeps high enough while going up in volume? How to go about that?
Yeah, it's super straightforward. So, funny, I can make another interesting critique right here. I think individuals who train with one session overly intensely all the way to failure will have trouble keeping up their intensity session to session to session because of accumulated fatigue. So, there's the other argument too, that if you train to failure all the time, what you call failure can start to degrade over the weeks because you burn out. I wonder if these gentlemen think there's an epidemic of that going on, because there fucking for sure is. Tons of college students go in and fucking grind, and then 2 weeks later, like, oh, fuck this, and they start either doing easy workouts, forget more volume, they do less volume, or they don't even show up to the gym, right? So the opposite is a problem as well. I do agree with them that there are people who are doing way too much volume and not intensely enough. That's absolutely a thing. I don't know if it's an epidemic, but it's definitely a thing. So the key with those individuals is not to just slough off their volume entirely and be like, don't worry about volume. You should still be concerned with volume, but you should bring an intentionality to every workout that you know exactly how close to failure you want to go, which is using the reps in reserve method, which I believe Eric Helms really pioneered in the scientific sense. How many reps do you think you have left in the tank? And you have to know how hard you're training, and you have to have gone to failure plenty to really know how many reps in reserve you have. But if you're getting pretty close to failure, 2-3 reps away, you're getting really, really good stimulus. So maybe you can start a mesocycle at like 4 reps away from failure or 3, and every week you add a little bit of weight or add a little bit of reps to keep that either the same or preferably getting even closer to failure. So that after 4 or 5 or 6 weeks, you're reaching true muscular failure, trying to match your performance from the last microcycles. And then you've guaranteed yourself that you were in this window of failure that was really productive the entire time. And performance is really, I think, the way to do that. So for example, if you benched 100 kilos for roughly sets of 10 last week, this week 102.5 is on the bar, you had better fucking do at least 10 reps on most of these sets. Because if you go, oh, I'm tired, I feel like 8's, like, you may not be getting anywhere close to failure and actually further away. So if your performance is stable or it's actually going up over time, I think you start at 3 or 4 reps from failure, it's really pretty impossible or very unlikely to get really far away from failure magically somehow. And eventually fatigue catches up to you and your performance will fall. You deload then, that's when you hit your maximum recoverable volume. You deload, you wash out all the fatigue, and then you start that climb again. So you climb and climb and climb, and I think that's a pretty good way of going about it. And just lastly, on a psychological note, you need to search deep down inside and figure out if you really know what the fuck training failure is. It is a place for training super hard. There is a place for going hardcore. And you might have said, well, I'm 3 reps away from failure in week 1. By week 6, before your deload, you might go to true failure and you realize you had 8 more reps in the tank than you realized. Well, there's my next tip for people who want to get close to failure. Knowledge. Take that lesson with you and be like, fuck, man, I was really way further than I thought I was. Next time I think I'm 3 or 4 reps away from failure, I'm going to do like 5 more reps. And you try it and it works, and all of a sudden you're training harder and harder. Everything's better and better. It doesn't mean you need to go to failure all the time. You just need to set your intent and go to failure occasionally so you know you're within that really good zone.
I agree. Greg says people are choosing to do more volume with less intensity because it's easier.
So people are trying to make up for intensity with volume. Why? Why are they doing this? Because it's easier. Easier.
Is that right?
No. I was going to be charitable on that, but so it could be. It could be right for some people. So I think some people can just slog through a workout, no problem, and not go to failure, and that's easier for them. The opposite argument can be made easily. So if you have a workout of 20 sets, some reps from failure, versus a workout of 5 sets all out, 5 sets is just not that hard to do, man. Like if you told me my quad workout just had to be 5 sets, mine are pretty small anyway, they're more frequent, but let's say, I had one weekly workout of legs to do and it was 5 sets. Dude, I could move the fucking worlds in 5 sets. I don't give a fuck. I'll bleed out of my eyes in 5 sets. I'm not going to bleed out of my eyes for 20 sets. I'll probably just die. So people say like, oh man, I'm fucking trained real hard. And you're like, really? Well, tell me about it. They're like, yeah, man, my workout takes 30 minutes. You're like, like I can probably get stabbed in the face for 30 minutes and sort of deal with it. What am I getting stabbed in the face for 2-3 hours multiple times a week? Well, yeah, nobody wants to do that. So I think there's 2 ways to make a workout easy. You make it needlessly short by going super to failure, or you make it needlessly long and take it super easy the whole time. Why don't we do this and go to failure, to proximity of failure that we need, and also as long as we need. And that's where like analysis comes to mind. Like, so for example, if you have done, 8 sets in your workout last week and you want to know what to do this week, your performance is increasing or stable. You didn't get super sore last time, and you actually, sort of analyze the situation and say, okay, knowing that volume sets have an additive effect on hypertrophy, if recovery is well within means, I should add a set, right? Or 2. So you go up to 9 sets that week. I mean, do you want to do 9 sets? No, you want to do 0 sets because training's fucking hard. But the logic and the reason says that you have to do 9 sets to get closer to optimal, because 8 sets is a good thing. It'll get you jacked, but because clearly you're not getting very sore and clearly your performance is going up instead of flatlining, you have a fatigue reserve, and most of the literature and theory says that probably doing a little bit more work will get you a little bit more jacked. So it's time to do 9 sets. Now, you're not running from anything or to anything. You're not trying to make the workout easier. You're just trying to make the workout effective. So are there those people that try to elongate the workout to make it easier? Yes, but a lot of that is actually harder because it's a fucking longer. I don't want to be in the gym for 2 fucking hours. So laziness can take you on the route of doing easy workouts that take longer. It can take you on the route of doing super hard workouts that take very little time. But what it should do is you should not be lazy in the gym and just do exactly what is prescribed by your autoregulation algorithms. Okay, this is how much volume I started with. I didn't get super sore. I healed on time, and my performance is good. That probably means I should add a set. You keep going and going and going, and the entire time you get closer and closer to failure. So week 1 of your workouts should be pretty easy because it's not very difficult to grow muscle with a novel set of exercises in the first week after a week layoff. But as the weeks go on, workouts are getting harder and harder and harder. There's a few of my clients some years back named week 4 of a 4-week progression wheelchair week, because you feel like you're like a disabled person because you're like, oh my God. And psychologically it takes everything from you because you are going close to failure or 1 rep in reserve with like 10 working sets per session, 2 to 3 sessions a week. It's mind boggling. That's for each muscle, right? So it's really, really hard. There's a time and place to go super hard and a time and place to not go super hard. And generally speaking, volume and intensity can be moved at the same time from one place to another.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, Greg also criticizes the whole reps in reserve concept. He says it's a concept for lazy people that are holding back.
They don't know how many reps are in the tank, so they end up, there's 5 reps in the tank. So the danger is, if you tell yourself, I'm going to hold back, I'm going to stop 3 reps shy of failure, chances are you're going to stop 5 reps shy of failure. This is what I see in the gym. People are lazy, people don't train hard, and so to tell someone to hold back when they're already holding back is moronic and asinine.
So most people can't tell how many reps in reserve they have in the tank. So what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, beginners are really bad at it. But beginners, there's just another study that Greg Knuckles sent me that showed data on untrained beginners. They had a failure group and a non-failure group, and the non-failure group grew just as much muscle as the failure group, and in some cases actually more. So beginners don't have to go to failure. Beginners grow no matter what. This is not something that I'm interested in debating because it's obvious. I don't want to say it's obviously true. It's just, I take back. I could debate it, but it'd be a hilarious debate. Everyone knows noobs grow easy no matter fucking what. So, and noobs also misestimate their RR on average, and they think they're training a lot harder than they are. Well, good news is as you get more advanced, you push it harder and push it harder. So when your gains do slow down, and I think this is to Greg's point here, is as you go from beginner to intermediate, you do have to wake the fuck up a little bit and train harder because you might not be training as hard as you thought. And then you start getting better and better and better at gauging reps in reserve and gauging what true failure is. Same thing. And then you become really, really good at it. And then it's no longer something you're doing that's for pussies. it's something that you're doing because it's the best idea to do from a mechanistic perspective, it's just going to grow more muscle. Like when I stop 2 reps shy of failure on upright rows, it's not because I'm like, oh, you know, I don't want to get hurt. Like it's because I know it's a good idea for next time. And the next time I go 1 rep from failure, next time I go 0. And the time after that, I could even do 4 reps for a single workout before I deload if it's a good idea. So I think something important to say is, if you want to be a real thinking trainee, a thinking trainer, somebody who gets the most out of lifting, you have to completely separate what is right to do from a mechanistic perspective and what you are psychologically capable of doing and want to do. This shit right here doesn't mean a fucking thing. So you throw that away. Do this. That's hardcore training, is doing what you have to, not what you feel like do. You might feel, so the other side of this debate here is you might feel like training to failure makes you hardcore and grows your balls or whatever. Like, wow, you know, like you're king shit now. And it might, like it's fucking baller to do that shit. But we don't go to the gym to do baller shit. We go to the gym to grow muscle. And sometimes it calls for being pretty far away from failure with low volumes. And sometimes it calls for you to just get like a giant metal stamp over you, like that kind of workout where you barely survive. There's a time and a place for that. When the time and a place is determined by logic, what makes sense and what's scientifically discovered that is a good idea, not by like feelings of ego. Like I don't want to go to the gym and train in such a way that convinces myself and others that I'm definitely not a pussy. Fuck if I give a shit what people think about me, right? Think I'm a pussy, think I'm whatever. You're going to think I'm jacked after a certain time because I'm going to grow the most muscle, and then I can still be a pussy. I don't give a fuck, right? We're here to grow muscle. If you want to not be a pussy, go do MMA or something like that. Or I don't know, yell at yourself in the mirror for a couple of hours a day. Some shit like that, right? So the pussification and laziness, that's all tangential to the discussion of what's proper. Once you know what's proper, you do what it takes psychologically, which arguably makes you not a pussy at all, to do what it takes. And then once you do that, you'll have all these great results, and psychology aside.
Mm-hmm. Well, Greg advocates just to train really, really hard, and when you're tired, stop. So simple.
How many sets should you do in a workout? Is it a 10, 20, 30, and is it 3 times a week, 2 times a week? What's the minimum effective volume? What is the max intensity? What is RPE? Stop all the scientific mumbo jumbo. Train harder. Harder! Are you getting it? Just train harder. How many sets? Go really, really hard. And then when you're tired and you can't lift, stop. Boom! Do you need a scientific paper to say it's 17 sets at this intensity, RPP of 9/Eric Holmes/Bergendine and fitness, etc. and this guy and this study, and every study contradicts the last study. It's so simple that you're overcomplicating it. People train like pussies in the gym. They're lazy.
Can you relate that some people would rather train that way and don't care about all the scientific complicated stuff?
Yeah, sure. And again, that's illustrating the fallacy that I just discussed, where you train psychologically. Now, this is a very interesting psychological way to train. I could poke a couple holes in it with all due respect. You know, so what does tired mean? Like, when are you tired? I'm tired when I get to the gym. I'm tired after 1 set. I'm tired after 18 sets. There is such a thing as training too much, by the way. It's definitely a thing. So somebody could just train into the ground, just following this, you know, advice, so to speak. I think this advice has a massive grain of truth to it. And the advice is, can be interpreted in a very scientific way by saying, you know, once your central fatigue or systemic fatigue exits your ability to contract the muscle to its hardest degree, basically your ability to target the muscle and contract hard where you want it is not the limiting factor anymore. The limiting factor is just like, oh, I can't do this. Your cardiovascular system's too tired. Your nervous system is too tired. Once that happens, your junk volume just goes like this and your effective volume goes like that. So it's probably a good time to stop. But then, you know, that's super, super true and super good advice, or the super underlying reason to it. But you need a way for people to maybe understand how to practically impose that, and what set numbers in an average population will roughly correlate with that. Because you could have a person to be like, I did 1 set, I got tired and I'm done. You'd be like, yeah, but you're not really tired. They'd be like, I feel tired. And you're like, you know, call them a pussy again or yell at them. It's nice, but it doesn't really get the point across. Other individuals say, look, I did 35 sets all out to failure. Like, and I still feel like I can keep going. You're like, Jesus Christ, you know, like maybe you're misestimating where central fatigue is. So I think the best thing to do is to teach people 2 things. One, you give them reference standards for the population, like anywhere between 3 and 10 sets per session, hard, right? 3 reps to failure or closer is probably a really good range for most people. When you start at the low end, you work up as you need and experiment, right? And the second thing is teach them how to gauge teach them what systemic fatigue is and teach them how to gauge it, and teach them what local contractility is of the muscle and teach them how to gauge it. You basically ask them after 8 sets of curls, be like, you really feel in your biceps? Do you feel the fibers fucking ripping when you're going? And if they're honest, and honesty is critical and everything, they're going to be like, you know what? I just feel like I want to kill myself. You're like, we could just leave the gym right now because I guarantee you're not recruiting your biceps nearly as much as they should be recruited. It's just shitty quality work. In other words, the stimulus is this and the fatigue is that because you're just, you're there and just all systemic fatigue, which is bad because it affects the rest of your body. It shuts down your appetite. Your catabolic hormones go up, all this really, really bad stuff, right? But if someone, 2 or 3 or 4 sets in, let's even say 6 sets in, you ask them how their cable flies are going, like how's it feeling? Are you centrally or systemically fatigued, or how does the local muscle feel? And they say, look, like I feel fine when I start the flies, and as I'm getting close to failure, I don't feel like systemically bogged down. I just feel like my muscles are crunching, and I can fucking just feel them tearing in there, and I feel every strand. You're gonna be like, so long as you don't do too much of this, which we talk about damage and hypertrophy interaction, I think you can keep going because you're clearly still getting really effective work, right? So I think that's pretty good advice, layered onto the advice of, when you get tired, just stop. I think there needs to be a little bit more explanation of what that sort of is.
Okay. Greg says that he agrees more with Jeff Cavaliere, train hard with less volume, than with Jeff Nippard, that said use moderate volume and hold back a bit on intensity, because Jeff Nippard chooses to be more average than elite.
So Jeff Cavaliere, like me, I actually think I agree more with what Jeff Cavaliere says overall than Jeff Nippard overall, even though I agree with probably 90 to 95% of what Jeff Nippard says. I think Jeff Cavaliere is more like me, more like a hardcore training type of person. Jeff Nippard, the more I watch his videos, is they're more catered to like the average audience, which makes sense because more people are average than elite.
So if hard training with lower volumes equals elite and moderate volume with moderate intensity equals average, where do you see yourself on that scale being a high volume guy, Dr. Mike?
Average as fuck, although I say, I start my mesocycles considerably below average and then work through average and then get to elite or something. I don't even know. They don't have the last weeks of my mesos are when I go close to failure with like 10 sets per session, which it's not even in his diagram of things, right? So, I mean, it's a false dichotomy is what I would say, right? I think both methods are pretty effective. I think the more sustainable long-term method is the one that Jeff Nippard describes. But I think Jeff Nippard doesn't actually say hold back from failure all the time. I've had many discussions with Jeff. I think I understand his approach pretty well. And that's, start the mesocycle, don't going super close to failure. And then as you, go, eventually you're going to hit failure anyway. And I think that's probably a good thing. And Jeff probably thinks it's a good thing. I don't think he says you should stop every set always 2 reps from failure. And if he does, I have misunderstood his views. So I think that, having a little bit of reserve to begin with is probably a good idea. But at the same time, if you're one of these individuals that really has trouble gauging their reserve and really is always 10 reps in reserve when they think they're 2, you can absolutely take a page out of Jeff Cavaliere and Greg Doucette's book and train fucking harder for sure. But once you know how to train hard, which is a prerequisite, you still have to answer the question of how much volume you're doing. And it is possible to train super hard and do more volume or train super hard and do less. How much you should do is for the volume landmarks to answer.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I saw the video and Greg recommends that you stop a certain exercise when you cannot lift 10% as much as you could on the previous set.
When you cannot lift 10% as much as you could on the previous set, that means you're done.
I guess you don't agree with that advice.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting number. I don't know what 10% means, like 10% fewer
10%
reps?
less in kilograms, he said.
For the same reps.
For the same reps.
Well, so like one thing is, if you go to true failure, you almost never can get the same number of reps set to set to set. So I'd wonder how that works. So like if you do a set of deadlifts for 8 truly to failure, your next set, unless you rest maybe 25 or 30 minutes, is not going to be 8. It's going to be like 4, maybe 6, right? And I don't know how how much of a rep drop off does he say you should have until you shouldn't do it anymore? I don't know. So I think that's I would view it as mildly arbitrary advice. Also, there's a lot of intramuscular and inter-individual differences in drop off, right? They don't exactly correlate to hypertrophy. So some people just have very endurant muscles, and some people don't have very endurant muscles at all. And some muscles are very endurant, and some are not at all. So I think that it's kind of it's an interesting number. It might have some reference to reality. It might be helpful, but I think it's helpful in a way that's not super objective. I think we can do better and have more objective standards for when it's time to stop doing the number of sets that we're doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Greg advocates training above failure, as he said, using partial reps, slow eccentrics, drop sets, and so on. All this to increase intensity.
I usually train 5 reps above failure. Half the sets I do, I can't do another rep, then I'll do 5 partial reps or half reps, or I'll do a slow eccentric, or I'll cheat the weight, or I'll do a drop set. I'm trying to increase my intensity. That is what I advocate. None of this volume bull poop.
Is that a good idea, Mike?
Yeah, like in a single session, it'll probably cause the most growth possible. But again, the stimulus to fatigue ratio of stuff like that just turns out to be not so great. So, training beyond failure is even more fatiguing than training to failure. But I think it also it has a continual linear increase in gains, but an exponential increase in fatigue. It's not something you can sustain a ton. I honestly think that, a lot of professional bodybuilders train with very low frequencies, just 1 time a week per muscle group. And I think some of that might be pretty close to optimal, but a little bit of ways. And I think they could get closer to optimal if they stopped training so fucking hard every session and just did more sessions per week. Some of that's too much volume, and some of that is going all the way to all-out failure. I actually think the number one reason people train all the way to all-out failure has nothing to do with science or physiology. It has to do with just being egotistical and being masculine, which is sweet. It's cool as far as it goes, but it doesn't go far enough. I just want to fucking just spill my guts here. And yeah, it's sweet. Let's something to that. It feels, I would say, cathartic, right? It's like, oh, wow, like I really poured my heart out. It feels sort of therapeutic. But you don't really go to the gym. I mean, if you go to the gym for therapy, that's super cool. It's a cool side benefit, but don't delude yourself that you're going there for hypertrophy. You go there for hypertrophy, you train like a machine. You train like a logician would train. And the way you train like that is to think things through a whole lot. And if the stimulus to fatigue ratio doesn't make any sense, it doesn't matter how training to failure makes you feel. Don't go to failure all the time. So that's what I would say there.
Okay, one last point, Mike. Greg says half of his subs are morons.
Half my subs are morons. Doesn't matter. Keep the subs coming. Maybe if you watch enough of my videos, you will no longer be a moron. You will only be an idiot.
In order to increase the average intelligence, are you willing to become a follower of his channel, Mike?
I don't know. I might decrease the average intelligence. You don't know. He could have an IQ of like 2,000 or some shit, and then his average is just 1,500 there, and I'm way below. Yeah, I don't know. I think he seems like a swell guy, but boy, does he yell a lot. He's exclusively yelled during that video. I actually really a big fan of the comments. On his channel of that video, it was like, how much volume? Like, question, how much volume, Greg? Do more. I was like, thanks. So I think it's very entertaining. And I think, in many other respects, he has some wisdom to bring. He has a ton of wisdom to bring in this respect, but, some of it is not maybe the most optimal thing you could be doing.
Okay. Thank you so much for wanting to do this video with me, Mike. I asked Greg to do it face-to-face with us, but he said he was way too busy. Any last things you wanted to say to Greg Doucette, or tips or advice for those who follow him or his way of training?
I think that we can learn from a multitude of people, and I think that if you are a thinking person, you should follow Greg Doucette, get on his YouTube, subscribe, and give some thought to what he has to say, because a lot of the shit he has to say is fucking spot on. And I think that some of the shit he said here was wrong, but a bunch of the shit I say is wrong, and a bunch of the shit he says is right. So I think everyone's cool to be in the mix and learn from everybody else, except for people with obtrusively large mustaches. I don't think they should be trusted. Definitely unfollow them.
Okay, thanks so much, Mike. Talk to you another time.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks.